Greetings all, and welcome to the 43rd episode of TM Technical Movement. For today, we'll be looking at the Lick, Nightshade, Astonish, Shadow Punch, and Shadow Ball attacks, and the Confuse Ray, Nightmare, Curse, Spite, Destiny Bond, Grudge, and Trick or Treat techniques. Much as the name suggests, the Lick attack involves striking with a full body lick using a tongue that contains considerable amounts of numbing agents at close range. Although the Lick attack is considered a ghost type attack, it's interesting to note that the move is mainly learned by non-ghost type Pokemon, with only a handful of actual ghost types actually able to learn it naturally. The attack is technically only classified as a ghost type move because it shares the same type effects as other ghost type attacks, namely the ability to cause super effective damage against psychic and ghost types and an inability to actually inflict damage against normal types. As such, the only real anatomical limitation to the attack is that a Pokemon must contain a considerable amount of numbing agents within their saliva that actually intensify both the emotional and physical trauma sustained in the attack. From a practical standpoint, these numbing agents have the effect of potentially stunning or damaging nerves as they seep into soft flesh and even armor, in turn inflicting paralysis about 30% of the time. This alone can make it a great weapon for trainers early on, particularly because there are relatively few other attacks that have such a high chance of inflicting a status condition in addition to dealing damage. Since an opponent must expose the tongue to execute a Lick attack, attacking the exposed tongue can help negate damage from the attack, and sometimes even damage the opposition if the counterattack is forceful enough. Otherwise, the attack is exceptionally difficult to dodge in close quarters. Additionally, armor will do little to reduce the damage dealt by the attack. Thankfully, the actual damage dealt by the Lick attack is low enough that it should rarely be of much concern in battle. The only thing that truly makes the attack threatening is the chance of paralysis, which can easily be compensated for with items or the right abilities. In essence, the Nightshade attack involves generating a frightening mirage out of spiritual energy in order to inflict damage from fear alone. The Nightshade itself is little more than a frightening mirage that the user creates from shadowy beams of spiritual energy in order to inflict damage on the opposition by scaring them into submission. The mirage is only able to actually inflict damage because it's made of raw spiritual energy without any distinct form. This allows the shade to lock onto the mind of the closest target and search for their greatest fear without prejudice before assuming the form of that fear for a short period of time. The damage inflicted on a target by the shade is dependent upon how long the mirage lasts, which in turn is dependent upon the natural powers of the user and their overall experience level. As a result, the amount of damage this fearful mirage can actually deal is limited to a certain extent and is thus imperfect at inflicting large amounts of damage against more experienced opponents, but the fact that it deals consistent damage and is still effective items like King's Rocks can help those that are able to use the move to deal significant damage against otherwise defensively impenetrable opponents, which might explain why it was installed as TM42 in Silph Co's 9th generation line of TMs. Due to its use of spiritual energy to inflict damage, there is no way to directly counter or dodge the Nightshade attack, unless you happen to have a Pokemon that is literally incapable of feeling fear for some reason. The Nightshade attack is a useful move against weaker Pokemon, but the damage it does can never go past a certain amount, so it can easily be compensated for by using much more powerful moves to whittle down the opponent faster. In effect, the Astonish attack involves the user wildly screaming in the opponent's face in either a random or curse-oriented fashion. The Astonish attack is a good example of types not always being representative of a move's actual properties. The Astonish attack itself is little more than a physical strike delivered amongst a frightening series of screams and screeches designed to cause emotional trauma to the opposition beyond the damage of the physical blow itself. However, this sound is so disturbing and damaging to creatures that rely on spiritual or psychokinetic energy to deal damage in battle that the move is technically classified as a ghost-type move, even though the attack is otherwise nothing special. Oddly enough though, ghost types that are able to use the attack do not spout random gibberish like other Pokemon, but instead purposefully use the attack to cast incantations designed to weaken the opponent's morale and deal emotional damage in that sense. Regardless, the sudden explosion of frightening noise seems to have an astonishingly negative effect on all that directly hear it, as the move has a 30% chance of causing the target to flinch as long as the user gets to move first. Though this might come with the trade-off of being unaffected by items like King's Rocks, the Astonish attack is nonetheless an interesting move for younger Pokemon to have around that can at least give them the chance to escape or survive stronger opponents until they gain access to something more powerful. Since the actual execution of the attack varies depending upon the user, there is no way to directly counter or dodge the Astonish attack. Additionally, armor will do little to reduce the damage dealt by the attack. The Astonish attack is certainly not powerful enough to pose much of a threat to most Pokemon, but the fact that it has a high chance of causing a target to flinch can nonetheless make it a frustrating move that only faster Pokemon or those protected against this status condition will be able to easily handle. As its name might suggest, the Shadow Punch attack involves striking the opponent with a projectile-based shadowy fist or one otherwise cloaked in spiritual energy. The Shadow Punch attack is a moderately powerful but otherwise devastating strike that Ghost-type Pokemon can use to wreak havoc on opponents that otherwise like to use agility and invisibility to hide themselves from view. The Shadow Punch itself is a fist-shaped wave of spiritual energy that the user generates and fires from his own fist at a target to inflict damage. Although the move still retains its ability to deal physical damage despite being a projectile in most cases, though some ghost types may actually resort to using their own fists in close quarters, what truly makes the Shadow Punch attack a threat is the fact that the shadowy fists are actually able to track the opposition even if they attempt to dodge it or otherwise hidden from view. This is possible because each Shadow Punch is imbued with a unique incantation that locks in onto the resonant spiritual energy given off by a target and uses it to become a virtual homing missile that the opponent can never dodge no matter how hard they try. This makes the otherwise underpowered attack a brutal move to use in any confrontation, as its perfect accuracy rate can quickly prove to be the bane of sneak attacks and defensive strategists everywhere. Unless the opposition uses his own actual fist to attack, in which case they can be struck to reduce and negate the damage dealt by the attack, the Shadow Punch attack is almost impossible to counter or dodge. Additionally, armor will do little to reduce the damage dealt by the attack. The Shadow Punch is only moderately damaging and should thus not be much of a threat under normal circumstances, but if the opponent favors its use a great deal, the only reliable course of action that can be taken is to utilize Pokemon that have high defenses to take the blow with little trouble. In essence, the Shadow Ball attack involves firing a shadowy blob or ball of spiritual energy at the opposition in an effort to inflict damage and lower their capacity to resist further attacks. The Shadow Ball attack is a powerful Ghost-type move that is designed to allow Ghost-types to use their own spiritual energy to attack forcefully and directly without requiring them to get close to their target. The Shadow Ball itself is a spherical blob or energized ball of filtered spiritual energy designed to attack a target's special abilities and affect them adversely. The sheer damage done by this sudden influx of spiritual energy is highly moderate by normal standards, but is nonetheless made extremely dangerous by the fact that few of the Ghost-type attacks are able to reach a similar damage capacity or higher. Moreover, the move is designed not just to affect the opponent's special abilities, but more precisely, their resistance against special damage. In effect, the move acts as a disruptor that destabilizes their internal systems and makes them more susceptible to special damage, in turn lowering their special defense stat about 20% of the time. Altogether, this makes the Shadow Ball attack a potent move that can be utilized effectively almost regardless of who is using it, a trait that impressed Silphco enough to make them release the move as TM30 for within their second generation line of TMs. From there, the move's popularity among all types of trainers has enabled it to maintain its status throughout almost all successive generations, including the recent Sinnoh Special Edition set, only recently becoming TR33 for the company's first line of TRs before transitioning into TM114 for the 9th generation line of TMs. Due to its rapid execution speed and use of spiritual energy to inflict damage, there is no way to directly counter or dodge the Shadow Ball attack. Additionally, armor will do little to reduce the damage dealt by the attack. The Shadow Ball attack is fairly powerful despite its simple appearance, and can deal considerable amounts of damage when applied correctly in battle, so strong defenses are highly recommended for reducing whatever impact the attack can potentially have. Much as the name suggests, the Confuse Ray technique involves firing a ball or ray of spiritual energy at an opponent in an attempt to confuse them. The Confuse Ray technique is a potentially devastating move for its ability to strike any opponent within range without missing under normal circumstances. The Confuse Ray itself is a ball or beam of concentrated spiritual energy designed to enter the mind of an opponent and cause electrical disruption within their brains, in turn inducing an intense state of confusion. Because the move utilizes spiritual power and spiritual power only, little scientific information is available to describe its exact properties. What can be said, however, is that it is not limited to ghost types and is in fact accessible to a wide variety of Pokemon because no processing of spiritual energy is required for it. In effect, the Confuse Ray is simply a burst of unfiltered spiritual energy that can effectively strike nearby targets with the same amount of devastation every single time. In close quarters and afar, this can make the move an absolute tactic wrecker, essentially one of the worst nightmares an offensive tactician could ever experience, especially if the physical defenses are weak to begin with, which might explain why it was installed as TM17 in Silphco's 9th generation line of TMs. Moves, items, and abilities that either cure or prevent confusion are highly recommended for countering the Confuse Ray technique. Much as the name suggests, the Nightmare technique involves generating a terrible nightmare within the mind of a sleeping opponent in an effort to inflict massive amounts of damage over a sustained period of time. It comes as no surprise that bad dreams take a tremendous toll on the physical and mental health of humans, as the trauma we experience in a dream can more often than not be equated to permanent mental damage and even physical damage, as some people have in fact died from their own dreams. The Nightmare technique applies this effect with great vigor on any sleeping Pokemon in battle. When used, this move will literally induce a devastating nightmare within the mind of its target that saps it of its physical health continuously over a set period of time until it finally manages to wake up, if at all. When under the effects of a nightmare, a sleeping Pokemon will lose about 25% worth of its maximum HP every combat turn, and will be under its effects constantly until it manages to finally wake up, at which point the nightmare will be dispelled unless they're immediately put back to sleep, in which case they will continue to experience its effects. It might take a while for this move to finally knock out a target, but with the addition of further attacks assisting its effects, there is very little outside of actually waking up that is able to prevent this technique from defeating anything it touches with ease. It was for this reason that Silph decided to release the move as TM50 within the second generation line of TMs, but the difficulty associated with getting the move to work effectively in most battles eventually led to its discontinuation. The only effective way to counter the effects of the Nightmare technique is to fight with Pokemon that are immune to sleep as a result of their ability or some other factor, or that can be woken up quickly. As its name suggests, the Curse technique is a powerful curse capable of being used by both Pokemon with and without natural access to curse-generating abilities, and thus works differently depending upon the user's type. The Curse technique, despite its simple name, is perhaps the most complex curse-based move recognized, and is so fundamental to understanding the differences between Ghost-type Pokemon and the rest of the planet that it truly can be called by no other name. The Curse technique is designed to allow the user to utilize super concentrated spiritual energy to alter its overall combat abilities in battle, but what makes it interesting is that it can naturally be wielded properly by Pokemon that have no normal access to spiritual powers and thus has drastically different properties depending upon the user. When used by a non-Ghost type Pokemon, the massive influx of spiritual energy brought in by the subjected curse weakens the user's reflexes and lowers their speed stat, but consequently increases both their tolerance for physical pain, their defense stat, and their capacity to inflict physical damage, their attack stat. The user is unable to use the spiritual energy any further because it's normally incapable of using the energy at all. For Ghost types, however, this is far from the truth. Because Ghost types do have the ability to generate and lay curses naturally, the massive influx of spiritual energy brought on by the Curse technique is used by them to construct a far harsher curse. This new curse does not give them any real benefits. In fact, it actually requires them to use 50% of their maximum HP just to create it. But when inflicted on a target directly in front of them, this curse will do the same to them and continuously sap them of about 25% worth of their maximum health at the end of every single combat turn until they either faint or are switched out. Unlike most moves that require the user to sacrifice some of his own health to use, however, a Pokemon using this variation of the Curse technique can actually knock itself out without destabilizing the effects of the curse, in turn meaning that a long battle against many opponents can easily make this move worth using even if it knocks the user out in the process. Since the move's effects actually flip depending upon who is using it, it was once thought the Curse technique was literally an indefinable unknown type. Recent studies, however, have completely dispelled the mystery and properly labeled the move as a Ghost type move. Even so, that didn't stop Silph from releasing the move as TM3 within their second generation line of TMs, but despite the promise it could have held, few trainers were into the move at the time, and its sales was so poor that it was discontinued afterwards, though recent resurgence in popularity has led to its resurrection as TM224 in Silph's 9th generation line of TMs. If used by a non-Ghost type Pokemon, attacks and techniques that raise a Pokemon's or lower an opponent's attack and defense stats are highly recommended for dealing with the Curse technique. If used by Ghost type, however, only switching out the afflicted Pokemon will be able to remove the technique's effects. In effect, the Spike technique involves laying a noxious curse on an opponent that saps them of stamina and makes them less able to utilize the move less executed by them in battle. Ghost types and beasts with similar powers are well known for their ability to utilize devastating curses as a direct weapon, and the Spike technique is no exception. The Spike technique is a specialized curse designed to inflict a terrible grudge on a target by draining not only its stamina reserves, but for the stamina it has reserved for a particular move, namely the move they last used. When executed properly, a single Spire attack will sap about 4 power points worth of stamina from the move last used by an opponent, which in turn means that stamina costly moves like Hydro Pump or Fire Blast will be instantly removed from the target's attack repertoire for the rest of the battle. While it might not be so scary when fighting against younger Pokemon that naturally have access to attacks as low stamina costs, this move can be more than devastating in professional battles against trainers that prefer to stick with more powerful moves for offense and can easily turn an otherwise long battle into a quick and potentially brutal short encounter, which might explain why it was instated as TM177 in Silph's 9th generation line of TMs. Due to its unique attributes, there is no way to directly counter the effects of the Spike technique. In essence, the Destiny Bond technique involves laying a curse on all opponents on the battlefield that ensures that any defeat the user on the next turn are taken down as well. The Destiny Bond is actually a potent curse that is designed to wreak havoc on Pokemon that would dare cause harm to the user. The Destiny Bond itself is a weak spiritual link that is created between the user and all surrounding opponents for a short time that effectively links the user's conscious state with that of everyone else. As long as this bond exists, which is about only a single turn of combat, any changes in the user's state of being will result in an equal change in the force responsible for that change. In simpler terms, if the user is knocked out by an attack that deals direct damage before it has the chance to use another move, the user of that attack will receive a tremendous feedback of spiritual energy that will also knock them out regardless of their position on the battlefield. This move goes completely unaffected by items and abilities that would otherwise save Pokémon from one-hit KO blows, so its potential for absolute devastation is more than apparent, even if it can be a difficult move to pull off properly. Its only real downside is that its chances of success drop by 50% with each successive use, down to a minimum of 12.5%, but that shouldn't be too much of a problem if used properly. It might not be able to bring back the user to battle-ready health, but at the very least it can leave the opposition with a parting gift they won't soon forget. Due to its unique attributes, there is no way to directly counter the effects of the Destiny Bond technique outside of simply not defeating the opposition until it manages to use a different move. In essence, the Grudge technique involves the user placing a opponent curse on the opposition that will prevent them from using the next move they use if it manages to directly cause the user to faint. The Grudge technique is an advanced curse learned by only a few species of Ghost-type Pokémon, as well as creatures like Vulpix, that enables them to have a lasting effect on an opponent that goes beyond simply making them feel sorry for knocking them out. While the Grudge curse supplied to a target itself is short-lasting and will fade the next moment the user attacks, if the target manages to knock out the user with a direct attack in the meantime, the Grudge curse will activate and drain the opponent of all the stamina they have reserved for the attack used to defeat the user. This relatively rare move might not do the user much good in the end, but for dealing with oppressive opponents that have access to extremely nasty attacks, this move can at least give fellow teammates an easier time trying to take them down in practice. Due to its unique attributes, there is no way to directly counter the effects of the Grudge technique. Considered to be the signature technique of the Pumpkaboo family, the Trick or Treat technique involves user casting a powerful curse on a target after taking them on a trick or treat walk of sorts that changes their type and effectively makes them partial ghost types. The Trick or Treat technique is a rare move learned only by the members of the Pumpkaboo family as a result of their close spiritual connection to Halloween and the autumn season in general. Similar to the curse technique, this move involves a Pokemon using its immense spiritual powers after taking their target on a trick or treat jaunt around the battlefield for the sake of fun and distraction, to create and cast a wicked curse on the target that heavily infuses their body with the spiritual energies of the ghost type, so much so that it forcefully adds the ghost type to the type assignment for the remainder of a battle. As long as this move is active, the opponent's attacks and the way it takes damage will be fully reflective of this addition, adding both resistances and weaknesses that are normally not present. This strange move can require a bit of expertise to use in battle properly, but for those willing to gamble on it, the move can easily add a serious problem to a target and tweak its weaknesses just enough to make getting a super effective strike easier, which is more than held out by the fact that both Pumpkaboo and especially Gourgeist are capable of learning a wide variety of moves via TM and HM. Unless the effects of the move can be nullified through the use of a forced curse technique, there is no way to directly counter the effects of the Trick or Treat technique. That's it for now, but look forward to the next set of moves here on TM Technical Movement. Thank you all for watching this video. It is a great pleasure to share with you all the fruits of my research and all the positives it gives to understanding the wonderful creatures we call Pokemon and how their powers and behaviors function in their world. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more work like it, please give a like, comment, and or subscribe to the channel so you can get regular notifications on when new content is being uploaded. You can also find links to my DeviantArt page, Patreon, and Discord server in the description below. Please, join me on this road to seeing what the world of Pokemon has to share with us, and the many mysteries and wonders that keep us all coming back for more.